Horror Movies Throughout the Decades by Leonardo Dominguez and with the advisory help of Mr. Cassell Stubbleton. Thesis. Various horror movies reflect the decades they were released in, each gaining inspiration from the problems that enveloped their world. The Dawn of Horror, 1920s. The Dawn of Horror is going to be seen in 1920s. First, with the two influential movies, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu. The Cabinet of Caligari, the directors are going to try to go for a dystopian environment, and they're German pacifist, so they see how the German army acts, and what they're trying to display is extreme distortion to express an inner emotional reality rather than surface appearances. And they're really trying to drive home what it was like to live in Nazi Germany during World War One. Both these are going to be forms of German expressionism, which is in a time where you cannot express or say anything political without being censored. They went in different directions and were creating movies that wouldn't be deemed anything subversive or anything like that. So they would fly just under the radar. And Nosferatu goes in a different direction with this twisted humanity aspect to Germans. And both are going to be silent films, yes. Vampiric Evolution, Dracula. To first understand Dracula, we must go back to the inspiration, Vlad the Impaler, who was born in Transylvania in 1431, who was this ruthless emperor who would kill women and children, drink their blood, and impale them with stakes. And Dracula, the movie, is going to be based on a novel from 1887 by Bram Stoker. Dracula is going to be heavily influenced also by Nosferatu, its predecessor vampire film. And it's going to really transform what a vampire should look like, with the slick back hair, and that he's almost going to have a charming persona to him, and when he still has really bad intentions. And this is going to be the first movie where there's going to be music included in film, with the inclusion of Swan Lake. A Wolf's Fate. The Wolfman is going to be created in the middle of World War II. And it's been written by Kurt Schildermacher and directed by George Wagner. Highly influential B film, and it's going to be one of the first movies to use speech. Kurt Schildermacher is a Jewish man who lived in Nazi Germany and fled to America. And the relevance of the moon and the Wolfman transformation is the moon is the swastika, and the Wolfman are the Nazi soldiers, and how they're normal during the day, but once the moon or the swastika comes up, they must betray their own humanity and do things they may not really agree with. Japan's Toxic Reptile, 1950s, Part 1. Japan post-World War I is going to be traumatized after the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We're going to see an abandonment of Shinto and a more focus on secular control. Japan's going to isolate, and they're going to censor anything they deem subversive, because this is what the government's going to basically dish out. Godzilla, the creators of Godzilla and Kaiju, Godzilla/Kaiju in 1954, what they're going to try doing is plan the collective fear of, during the Cold War, another major city being bombed like Tokyo, while still relating to the genetic mutations that people are still experiencing in places like Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and how it's affecting the wildlife. Join us, comrade, 1950s Part 2, Red Scare. And Americans are going to be really afraid of communism spreading to America, because communism at this time is going to be spreading through parts of Europe and parts of Asia, and there's this innate fear that's going to come to America. And there's going to be a lot of propaganda being made, and the invasion of the body snatchers in itself is propaganda, in that there's aliens going into this cul-de-sac, and they're taking over the bodies of regular American people, and you must differentiate who is an alien or a communist and who is a regular person or an American. And we're going to see this idea of McCarthyism, where you're going to want to turn in anyone who you suspect of being a communist. And it's almost going to break down this trust that communities in America have built up. Man-Made Monster, 1950s, Part 3. Ed Gein, caught November 16th, 1957. To first understand who Ed Gein was, we must go back to his childhood and understand that he came from an alcoholic, abusive home with no friends, only his brother and his father and his mother. His father and brother both died in his early life, leaving him with his abusive mother. And even though he deeply loved his mother was highly abusive to him. And once she died, he was still obsessed with her. He was a rural handyman, And once she died, he dug up her body and placed her dead body back in her room, cleaned the room, but left the whole house disgusting. And he's gonna start mutilating and skinning people and making making them into furniture. And he's gonna be doing these disgusting deeds. Negative connotations once he's been caught are gonna be men. There's gonna be negative connotations with men who live with their mother, wear tar and thermal hats, practice taxidermy because he would make skin furniture, and just rural handyman in general because that's who he was. Monster Made Man. So the first inspiration that comes directly from Ed Gein is going to be in Psycho, with Norman Bates exhuming his mother and killing women and dressing up as his mother because he's obsessed with his mother. Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974 is going to focus more on Ed Gein's obsession with the human skin, and Leatherface or Bubba is going to skin people and place their skin on his, and Bubba's house also is going to be decrepit with garbage all over the floor, just like Ed Gein's. There's going to be a heavy family influence that created Bubba into who he was today, or like who he turned him into, who he turned into. Silence of the Lambs is probably the furthest from the original Ed Gein, but it's more directly inspired by Psycho, and that Buffalo Bill skins and kidnaps women because he's confused, like Norman Bates, on this like psychological aspect of who is he, and he's gonna skin and kidnap women because he wants to become this almost perfect woman, just like how Ed Gein would skin women. Zombies. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. We're gonna see this death metamorphosis and the first inclusion of a black character in a horror movie. This movie's gonna be created in the middle of the Vietnam War, and there's gonna be this association with the draft and the infection. That once you're infected, there's no cure for it, and once you're drafted, there's no way out of the draft. There's gonna be this ethical conflict of what are we fighting for, and what is the reason we're going off to wars in different countries, or like what are we doing? Demon in the Void, 1970, Part 1. The Exorcist, 1973. Innocence does not equal immunity, and what that means is that the girl in the Exorcist plays the Ouija board with her mother, and in doing so, she summons the demon Pazuzu, or the devil, which possesses her. And once they take her to doctors to try getting her diagnosed, the doctors have no answer, saying she has psychological problems, when in reality, she's a demon possessing her. And what it takes priests coming to her house and having to exorcise her, and they have to give up their lives to save her. So it brings in this innate fear of, once you do this taboo with religion, you're basically gonna die. Like, you're gonna die. And it's gonna really call upon this question, who do you turn to when science fails? And the answer this movie provides is religion. Slashers and Final Girls in 1972, Part 2. Political climate in America. The Equal Rights Amendment is going to be passed by the Senate in 1972, and Roe v. Wade is going to be passed in 1973. So there's going to be this high feminist energy. And you're going to see that in Black Christmas in 1974, with inspiration, who drew inspirations from West Montreal murders, and Jessica Bradford, who was a model feminist. And when she finds out she is pregnant, her boyfriend tells her, let's drop everything and start a family. She tells him, no, I need to focus on my education. I'm getting an abortion. I do not want to start a family with you. And she's almost pushing this feminist narrative. Friday the 13th and Halloween are going to backtrack on this feminist narrative, in that the only women who are going to survive are these the virgins, or people who are seen as pure. And anyone who's seen as promiscuous or immoral is going to immediately die. And Laurie and Alice are going to be seen as these token good girls, and this idea is going to persist all the way into the 1990s. Are You a Friend of Dorothy? The Fly, 1986, by David Cronenberg. What it's basically being an allegory for is AIDS, and how people, once they are infected with AIDS, were almost seen as a doctor when he turned into the Fly, and that his loved ones are going to abandon him because he becomes something less than human, and that there's going to be this ostracization of gay men, or like anyone of the LGBTQ community, because there's this belief that they're contagious with no cure. So their families are going to leave them, and they're going to get shunned from society, just like how the doctor in this movie, once he turns into the Fly, he's shunned by even those who loved him previously. What's your favorite scary movie? Scream, my personal favorite, 1990s, 1996, by Wes Craven. What Scream's going to do that's different is they're going to acknowledge the tropes that have previously been put forth by like Halloween and Friday the 13th, of sexuality, the blonde, the jock, the nerd, and of course the final girl. And it's gonna break all these rules. A new age of female prominence in media, with women being seen as more powerful characters. Sidney Prescott is going to start this revolution with fighting back against the ghost-faced killer, and she doesn't need a gun. She just is a boss. So she sets this new precedent for what women in slasher films are going to look like and how women are just interpreted in general. Let's play a little game. 2000s. The early 2000s started off horribly with 9/11 and the Twin Towers falling, and how that was widely broadcast on TV, and how it traumatized the whole generation. We're going to see almost a desensitization by America in media, because there's so much of things of like the war on terror in Abu Ghraib, where torture is almost being pushed by America. And this is going to be seen in Hostel and Saw, where they're not going to go for the stylistic horror that's like psychological or like religious, and it's just gonna go for straight gore, which is the most gut-churning thing they can like put out, and it's really gonna give horror a bad name for the next few years. Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, Get Out, 2017. Get Out's gonna be so different because it's gonna be one of the first box office hits that's created by a black man in a genre that's predominantly created by white people for white people. And what it's going to talk about is how these smiling faces can have some of the worst intentions for you. That racism isn't just someone calling you a slur. It's so much deeper, and it's so much deeper rooted in America. And that's why this film is so influential, because it's going to be right after the 2016 election, which was highly contentious because we saw a lot of sparks of prejudice and discrimination. Hereditary and Midsommar are going to go in a more psychological area, created by Ari Aster, the director. First with Hereditary is parental trauma and its effect on children, and how this cycle almost needs to be broken in order to create a better generation. If the older generation keep projecting that their own traumas onto the younger ones, it's going to be an endless cycle going back and forth. Grief and Recovery. Danny in the movie Midsommar loses her sister to suicide and her parents on the same day. So she's grieving, and it's almost she needs to find this community in this Swedish cult, and this is where she finds solace, basically, where they provide this almost community for her of like psychological trauma that she wasn't able to talk about. In both these movies, fire is going to be seen as purity, like a sign of purity. The father in Hereditary is going to be burned alive, and he's almost going to be seen as, he's like a side character, while Danny burns her boyfriend, who is cheating on her and is neglecting her. So it's almost like going into a metamorphosis of sorts. So why horror movies matter? Horror movies have been extremely influential throughout media and how we perceive people in these movies. These slasher, like this, for instance, the slasher films are going to be the films that create how we interpreted women in our today's social climate. From the 1920s to 1940s, these almost also work as a timestamp that explain Germanic Nazi traumas on society and how people are speaking out against it. So it's almost a rebellion of sorts. Even with a 1950s kaiju or Godzilla, the horror movies have always been pushing the bar and pushing the envelope of what we interpret as scary, and they define what we as society find scary. And there's just so much more, because it explains not only just psychological, but it explains spiritual and just social economic and what's going on in the world around us. And it helps us be more cognizant of what is happening to the right and left of us. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk here on We're Excited. And my name is Leonardo Dominguez, and it's been a pleasure to speak to you about horror movies.